Hello everybody, my name is Dana Garcia, and today we're going to be talking about the book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. First and foremost, this is one of the best books I have ever read, hands down. It is written in a very obscure and symbolic form, but it is definitely worth it. I'm a slow reader, very slow reader, and it took me about a month to read. Like taking my time and taking notes while reading the book to understand it as good as possible, because I would personally say that it's impossible to understand this book 100% without any misinterpretations. After finishing Zarathustra, I took a look at the book by Walter Kaufmann, Nietzsche, philosopher, psychologist, and anarchist. And it made the experience of having read Zarathustra so much better because it truly explained a lot about Nietzsche and his life and kind of maybe where his inspirations might have come from and why he said the things he said in the book, which made it all so much more clear. I do think it's important to take your time with it. There's times when it gets so frustrating because it is complicated to read, so you kind of start to be like, oh my god, like I'm never gonna finish this, I don't understand what he's saying. But it's so important that you continue and that you don't just stay with reading the book because it's not ever enough. You have to also, if you want of course, to do some research on the book, on the things other people have said about it, and that will completely change your experience of reading Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So, on to the book. Okay, so this book begins with a man called Zarathustra that is living by himself in a cave for 10 years. He is completely by himself, isolated from the entire world, and there comes a point where he becomes so overcrowded with wisdom that he wants to go and share it with mankind. And this is where the book begins. Him descending from his cave and going to a town called Motley Cow, where he begins preaching to the people, telling them about this thing Nietzsche created called the Overman, which is basically the idea of the perfect man that we should all strive to become. He would stand in the streets and preach to people, saying that mankind is just a bridge to the Overman, and that he wanted people to truly achieve this goal so that we could evolve. But he said that the reason people weren't achieving this goal was because they were lazy and they were mediocre. So when he gets to the town, one of the first scenes he talks about is one of this tightrope walker that is about to put on a show. He kind of interrupts him, but people don't really care what he has to say. They kind of tell him to go off to the side and stop talking, because they're not interested. They want to see the great spectacular show the tightrope walker is about to put on. So with all this, Zarathustra moves out of the way and allows the tightrope walker to put on his show. When he is towards the middle of the rope, almost reaching the end, there's this jester that comes around and starts to distract him. And what I understood was that he jumps over him or something of the sort and basically makes him fall. So the tightrope walker falls and dies, but not instantaneously. He gets to have this conversation with Zarathustra, telling him how he was afraid to die, and Zarathustra tells him something about how it isn't a bad thing because he has lived his life on the edge, which is important, which is a great life to have, basically. But this whole story about the tightrope walker and the jester is so important because he's trying to make a point about humanity and what it would mean for humanity to strive for the Overman. So the tightrope walker resembles humankind, that is making the slow and steady process from animal to Overman. And the jester is Zarathustra, that is able to just cross swiftly through the tightrope walker without any problems and reach the end, so the Overman. It's complicated because what Nietzsche is trying to say is that if you offer people information that they're not ready to hear, you can ruin them, just like the jester ruined the tightrope walker by hurrying him to reach the end. There are some people that are simply not ready to receive the information Zarathustra has to offer, so that's why eventually Zarathustra goes off on his own for a little bit and decides to only preach to those that are interested in listening to him and that are interested in reaching this Overman, because anybody else that doesn't want to listen or isn't interested could be ruined by the information and made worse in the end. One of the first points that it makes this book so controversial is the fact that Nietzsche says this line that states that God is dead. But the meaning of this phrase has been taken greatly out of context, because people see this as Nietzsche saying that this was kind of like an expiration of God or some sort of end to him, death. But it wasn't that what he meant. Rather, that Western society was so dependent on this idea of religion and God for a moral compass to their lives, to add meaning to their lives, to give them a reason to be good, basically. And the reason he said this was because with this death of God, not actual death of God, people were gonna start having existential problems with not knowing basically what to do with themselves and fall into a very nihilistic way of living. And to make this part clear that this is what he meant, not in this book, but in another book called The Gay Science by Friedrich Nietzsche, he says this, and it's really important because it makes it clear for us what he actually meant when he said God is dead. And this is what he said: God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we conform ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe the blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? It's not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? So what Nietzsche is basically trying to say with this is that his words express great fear for humanity. He believes that with the decline of religion and the rise of atheism and this nihilistic belief, that people were not going to have a higher moral authority they could stand on. They would not have a guide to tell them how to live their lives and what not to do and what to do. And this was extremely alarming, because if tradition has offered us anything throughout history, was security and the capability to give the problems in our life answers. It was uncanny how accurate he was when describing what would happen to modern society, as said by Jordan B. Peterson.
Like they had their ear to the ground in a sense, and they could tell what was going on underneath everybody's facade. It echoed in them, and the people who were picking up the underground currents indicating often catastrophe felt absolutely compelled, even at the risk of their own skin, to warn people. He believed that the morality that had structured Western society was predicated on the fundamental axiom of divinity. And so, as far as Nietzsche was concerned, the whole corpus of morality was dependent on that axiom being true, or at least being accepted as true. And when that axiom was knocked out, by, say, the conflict between science and religion, because in some sense that's what did it, then the whole system no longer had anything to stand on and could become entirely questionable.
This is all super ironic because Nietzsche was the man that was a nihilist. But he believed that he was so careful about being a nihilist and having these beliefs that in a way it was okay for him to be a nihilist. But that the majority of people didn't understand the things that he understood. In that case, it wouldn't be as healthy for them to basically not believe in God. On the three metamorphoses. So this is another part of the book where he explains that there is 3 stages of progress between man and the overman. The first, he says, it's the camel. Then comes the lion. And last, the child. In the first one, he talks about renouncing all comforts, exercising self-discipline, and accepting all sorts of difficulties for the sake of strength and knowledge. In the second one, the lion, one must assess one's independence by saying no to outside influences or commands. And at last comes the child, which is basically the stage of creation, of making something of yourself and all of the things that you now know. The story of the 3 metamorphoses is basically what any philosopher or artist or writer or just any artistic creator goes through. There's an example of a painter. First, he must burden himself like a camel with the long and careful study that will lead him to a technical mastery of his art and a deep understanding of his tradition. Next, like a lion, he must assert his independence, righting himself away from the influence of all other artists. In this stage, the painter becomes like a child because he has acquired a new innocence. Any sight of the past struggle is absent, and what he can see now, it is what is new and fresh. On reading and writing. In this chapter, he expresses great sadness for widespread literacy because he says that it encourages people to dumb down and simplify itself to the modern day parlance, basically to appeal to most people, to the masses. How hard it is to become an intellectual. Throughout the whole book, he is constantly making remarks about how hard it is to become an intellectual, how tedious it is to reach that stage of the overman, or even not the overman, just in knowledge in general. Because not only is it hard to master the technical aspects of any art, whether it be drawing or philosophy, it is hard to then, after you know all of these things that other people have done, to make something new yourself and add to it. He talks about this slave class having created this idea of evil. He says, the aristocratic masters and everything about them, wealth, health, happiness, strength, vigor, were considered evil and contemptible. So that means that, in the other hand, the slaves, everything that they had was good, which was to be poor, unhappy, sick, weak, mediocre. Basically, they began to define that as something that was good just because the people that were oppressing them had all of the other things that were positive, but they were bad because they were oppressing them. In this book, what Nietzsche is trying to do is say that instead of living in a world that's full of pity and forced equality, that we should strive for a world that's full of creative freedom, that allows people to grow into what they're supposed to personally grow, that allows them to have all of the things they need to have to achieve this goal, and not have any sort of social constraints that keep them from reaching this goal. In conclusion, I hope that you guys go out there and take a look at Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Thank you so much for watching this video. My name is Dana Garcia and this was Moon Girl.